Welcome everybody. We are here for the second mentorship lecture here in Yale, organized by the Italian Society of Yale Students and Affiliates, together with ISSNAF and the Italian Council. This second lecture is scientifically oriented, and we couldn't have a better speaker than Pietro De Camilli. Why we couldn't have a better speaker than Pietro? Because Pietro is a leading scientist in neurobiology and in the cell biology field. But like many of us, he was partially educated. He received partially the education in Italy. Then he moved here in the Green Garden Lab to where he did his postdoc. And after a short period back in Italy, he was recruited at the cell biology department at the medical school by George Paladi, the founder of the cell biology field. He basically developed all his career in US, and he started basically introducing, I would say, like a cell biologist approach in neurobiology, a field that was at the time dominated by neurochemists and electrophysiologists. He introduced the advanced microscopy in that field, and he characterized all the components of the synaptic vesicles. He determined the role of these components in the vesicle formation, and I would say for people without a biological background, he basically developed like deep insights in understanding how neurons communicate each other. That's for people without biological background. And so those are the reasons because we invited him here, and we think that he's the right person to give like suggestions to young scientists that have still to develop their career. So with this, I'll stop talking and I will let Justina talk a bit about ISSNAF.
Thank you. Well, about ISSNAF, no, I think I will only thank the Italian Society for organizing, putting together this nice gathering, Professor De Camilli, on behalf of the board of ISSNAF. ISSNAF is the largest network of Italian scientists and scholars in Canada and the US. And within ISSNAF, we have a network in the network for researchers, investigators, and scholars who are younger than 40 years old and have at least 1 year of affiliation to an academic institution in North America. These mentorship lectures are held throughout the US and in Canada, are then posted on our website, www.issnaf.org, so that the many young investigators who are seeking for advice can also have access to them. Professor De Camilli is an outstanding mentor in this sense. He is an example of professional determination and of love for science, if I may say. And I think most of all, he is a person that can be an example in as pursuing neuroseparation. Basically broke barriers and frontiers, geographical and disciplinary too, because I think in trying to seek those neurotransmissions, he went from endocrinology to looking for the right place and the right technology and so on and so forth, and he thinks in this way contributed to opening a new field. So thank you very much, Professor De Camilli, and I leave you to our audience.
Okay, thank you very much for these generous introductions. I'm delighted to be here. I would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity to get together with some of my connationals and maybe also somebody from other countries. And it is actually a special pleasure for me to be here in this building because I've been here almost 30 years, but I spent all my professional life at the medical school. I never had the advantage to come in this beautiful environment, and it's really a privilege to be in this rooms that really convey convey the feeling of being in an institution of learning with a great history. I must say that when I was asked to come here to give this talk, I was a little bit reluctant for two reasons. The first reason because I didn't know well what was expected by me. The second reason because one of the great things of the academic community in the United States is that it values and respect international diversity. And so this is a great international universities. We are Italian, Swedish, Chinese, Indian, etc. And I never felt that this made any difference. Maybe things were different many years ago. We heard last time I came to the lecture of Guido Calabresi. He mentioned that he had to overcome some barrier because he came from Italy. At the time there was still some difficulty in accepting people from an Italian background. But this is certainly something that I didn't experience in my life, in my professional life. And the beauty of being here, that really being from another country doesn't count at all. And so in spite of feeling very deeply Italian in myself, I keep this private, and I never really had my Italian at work. I made a special effort, and I continue to make a special effort not to create an Italian community. I've seen around myself some scientists, they tend to create a little bit of a colony of people from their own country. I think this is not right, that the American has been extremely welcoming to diversity, and I would like to reciprocate that by avoiding any feeling of privilege for an ethnicity or another one. This doesn't mean that I'm not extremely proud to be Italian. I'm extremely Italian, I'm extremely proud of it, but I keep it within myself and I bring it every day to work, but I make an effort not to make it obvious. I try to speak, well, my language gives it away, but my inability to speak with English gives it away, but we make an effort in the lab not to speak Italian. Whenever somebody else, when anybody is around that doesn't speak Italian, I make an effort not to speak Italian. So you say, why did you come here? Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be among connationals. As I said, I feel very strongly Italian, and this ethnicity creates some affinity for other Italians. I see that there is a growing community of Italian students and postdocs. There were always many, but maybe more so now, in particular in science, because there are so few opportunities in Italy, and this actually is a sad aspect of what's going on in Italy in science. And also, I thought that perhaps my experience could be useful. With an opportunity to think about my experience here, I will try tonight to give some, to reflect on some of the emotions or things I have to go through that can be useful for other people. So I will. My short talk, I hope to be short, will touch essentially four things. I will give you a brief overview of my professional journey. I will tell you a little bit about how the differences that I experienced between the Italian and the American system, and the way in which this difference can help, can actually synergize to create something better than what we have only in Italy or in America. I will list some advice that I would like to give to junior faculty, junior scientists, and maybe at the end we can discuss a little bit about whether or not to go back to Italy, what it means, etc. But this I would like to really open more for a discussion. So I grew up in the north of Italy. I was born actually in the province of Varese, for those of you that know the area, very close to Switzerland. I went to school in Milano. I spent all my education. I received all my education in Milano, and I graduated from medical school in Milano. Why did I go to medical school? Very early on, already in high school, I wanted to do what I do now. I wanted to be a scientist, and but my perception was that medicine at the time was the best way to be prepared for a career in biological sciences. We had other training opportunity, laurea in biologia, for those of you that speak Italian, but those schools didn't seem to me to be rigorous, sufficiently rigorous. I felt that going to medical school, I would learn about one organism, learn about one organism from molecules to mind. That was very appealing to me, and it's something I never regret. My first experience of working in a lab on the second year of medical school had not been very positive, and so I almost gave up this idea. This, I should mention, was 68, 69, the moment of the student revolution. And so at some point, actually, it was very interesting. We got rid of the professor and we talked to ourselves. It was a very interesting time. But then when I was in the last year, I met a wonderful scientist that had been trained at the Rockefeller. In fact, in the group of Paladi, he was a postdoc with Jim Jamison, that some of you know. He had come back to Italy, and he was looking for a student. I met him at the scientific meeting. He inspired me. I went to him, and that was it. From then on, I was a scientist. I didn't come in America right away because my idea was not to come here to stay, but to come here for a postdoctorate, and I thought it was better to come after having had some experience in Italy, so I could come and have a better experience, and basically take the most advantage of an experience, as opposed to come immediately after the degree where I would have to start the ABC of how to hold the pipette, etc. So when it was time to apply to come for a postdoctorate, I applied to the laboratory for Gringer. Remember, I made my envelope. I went to the post office downtown, put a lot of stamps, airmail, and that was the time where you would put an envelope in the mailbox and wait for a couple of months before you had an answer. Things are very different. I got a positive reply. I came to Yale, that's where Paul Gringer was at the time. And I remember the shock of arriving in a place so different. I'd never been in America, so my English was worse than it is now. In particular, I didn't understand it. I kept looking for the heart of the city, and I couldn't find it. And I kept saying, but where is downtown? They say, it's here. But I thought they did not understand me. So there are many things that made my life not easy at the beginning. At the time, there was no, were not used to use the telephone. I would call home once a month. My mother made a subscription for me to a newspaper. I got the newspaper with 2 weeks delay. So every day I would read the paper 2 weeks before. So I'm not that old, but the time was quite different. But there were many positive things. Science was great. I remember what shocked me to see that my mentor, that was Paul Gringer, really spent all his time doing science. To me, it was a shock. Coming from a place where university professor did a lot of politics, a lot of exam, most of the time was spent doing exam, teaching. I don't know what they did, but the idea to have a professor spending all his time in the office for me was a shock. In the office doing science, and it was great. Also, what really impressed me tremendously in a positive way at the time, walking down the hall and see the name of all the scientists on the door, which people I read the newspaper I read, and I thought they were, I didn't think they were real people. I know the real people were real. It was really great. One thing was great, however, having come from Italy, I had received a very good training. Although the opportunity in Italy were much less, and this is still something I see now in the best academic institution in Italy, people cannot get the best reward from doing science, sometimes they don't have enough facilities and enough resources. They take a lot of satisfaction by training people. Having a person accepted in a top lab is an important reward. And in fact, I was the result of this kind of training, and I remember that I felt, while I knew much less than other postdocs, I felt that my training on the job had been very good, something I could be very proud of. So things went well. After 1 year, I started to collaborate with the Greger lab in pharmacology, but I started to collaborate with people in cell biology. So the chairman of cell biology asked me to stay. He offered me an assistant professor position, and I said no. And, and the reason why I said no is because I really wanted to go home. The time was very different. I think we were much less international. There was no internet, and in general, it was a less international society. And I remember that there was a little bit of a difference between the Southern European, the Northern European. The Southern European, Greek, Italian, Southern French, Spanish people, they all wanted to go back. Northern European, British, Swedish, etc., they wanted to stay. So, but I belonged to the group that, we came from a very static society. We grew up at home. We never went out to college. Everybody in Italy at the time, a little bit like still right now, they go to the university. The university close to home, and so I really wanted to go home. But there was actually something more. I felt a loyalty to my country. I felt like I would betray my country if I stayed here. So I said no, and George Pallade called me back a couple more times in his office, and he said, "You sure?" I said no, and finally convinced me to stay, and I said, "Okay, I will try." But 2 years later, I went back to Italy. Then, life is unpredictable, and particularly what I experienced, and I've seen also many other people, if you stay long enough in a place where you can do science in the way you do it here, eventually it's very difficult to adjust to another system. And so after having been in Italy for 5 years, finally I accepted the idea that given my interest in science, and also because of other reasons, it was better to come back here, and I came back here, and I've been here ever since. My life now, I've been here from 1987 in a continued way, and I was here 3 years before. I'm definitely American. I became an American citizen. I dual citizenship, although I have this incredible connection to my country. I go to Italy maybe 4 or 5 times a year. I have my kids going to Italy at least twice a year. And one thing that worked very well for me to maintain connection with Italy has been to be part of advisory board, review board, and I can mention now a few, that has been a wonderful way to be in contact in a way that I also had an opportunity to see the growth of the new generation of scientists. For example, I did on the advisory board of Teleton, which is the private foundation for the support of diseases, genetic diseases, of Armenise, the one that you know is an Italian Harvard foundation that gives fellowship to people that want to go back to Italy, of the IFOM, which is an institution in Milano for the study of cancer, IIT, which is an institute of Italian Institute of Technology in Genova, the VIM, the National Institute for Molecular Medicine. And it's interesting, many of these institutes, TGEM, again, is an institution run by Teleton. What's interesting is that some of these places which really represent the frontier of Italian scientists are actually the result of private foundation, private institution. Somehow the academic system has become quite sclerotic in Italy. There are beautiful places, there are some groups which are fantastic. I don't want in any way to denigrate great things are going on in Italy, but it's interesting that some of the best places are now places which have been generated outside the university system. And anyway, for those of you that want to maintain contact with the country, I think this is a very great way to stay in contact. Much better than commuting. I've seen many people that have attempted to keep a foot here and a foot there, I mean a leg here and a leg here. And that doesn't really work very well, because I think you have to invest in the way where you work. You have really to fully commit yourself. And this idea of the dual, of the committing, in my opinion, is not very successful. Obviously, everybody has a different experience, but this is not something I would recommend. As I was reflecting about things to discuss tonight, I thought about differences that I have experienced when I came here. And again, something might have struck me more than it struck you, so it's a very personal experience. But I would like to mention about some of these differences that I've experienced, and that offer me then the privilege really to get the best out of both worlds. So, for example, I felt that when I was in Italy, because I had quite a lot of experience and work was in Italy, because 3 years after my medical degree, and then 5 years between my two American experiences. My feeling that was there, sometimes the work, there is a lot of emphasis on creativity. The reality that you cannot do much, the resources are much fewer. And so what you do, you try to be smart. And so the best you can do is do things that nobody else has thought until then. There is less of a possibility to tackle a problem and its complexity from beginning to end. And so there are really two different ways to do science. Here you develop a project with a long-term vision, etc. There you have much less a possibility to do that. So your work, it's more a series of snapshots. Sometimes actually you can be more broad, because since you cannot go real in depth in a field from beginning to end, you surf a little bit more at the edges of problem, but sometimes you have the opportunity to create connection that if you have your eye stuck on a single problem down in depth, you cannot, you have not the opportunity to create this connection. So I have a feeling that sometimes there are seeds of idea, of projects that are born in Italy, which are quite unique, and then unfortunately cannot be further developed there to somewhere else. But I think there is some very creative science that goes on in Italy. I felt that in Italy there was a great tradition of description. So in Italy we had many very famous anatomists. I would say that the Italians contributed tremendously to the development of early anatomy and histology. And not surprisingly, in science, tradition is extremely important. You are trained by some mentor, that in turn were trained by other mentors, which in turn by other mentors. Tradition are very important. For example, in Germany, there is a great chemical tradition in chemistry. And in Italy, the tradition was in anatomy. And if you think about it, there are many top morphologists at various stages in the last century that came from Italy. And so I feel like I'm actually part of this tradition, because I always liked tremendously morphology and descriptive science, and I did a lot of microscopy. Here there was much more of an emphasis on mechanistic studies, and just putting these two together has been an extremely synergistic great opportunity. Something that really struck me when I came, the different work ethics. Whenever I went to work on Sunday, I felt guilty. And instead I arrived there and the Americans said, "Oh, you're coming on Sunday." They were actually admiring me for going. We really, we appreciate, we know that in life there is something more than work. And I guess all the people that are here probably put a little bit more emphasis on priority of work. But in some way, I think Italy has trained us to have a balanced view of things and on the world, and I think it actually changed very much. And I try also in my lab to, I see a member of my lab, but you know, I try not to impose the idea that you have to work every minute of the day. So, but you know, I think vacation are important. I think taking time off is important. It's important to stimulate creativity, and you know, I think it's they're an important component of life. Italians are very ingenious because we are not well organized. You know, Italians don't need instruction. In fact, yeah, that's what my wife is American. She always tell me I don't need any instruction, and just we develop things and we go. And but this sometimes can have great advantages, and you know, it allows us to again, it's a component of creativity. One big difference that would really struck me is that we are more used to work together. While in America there is an emphasis of individual achievement. And I fully understood that when my kid went to school here. I had experiences, probably all those of you that went to school in Italy, that you know, you go elementary school for 5 years, you have the same class, you have your 30 classmates, by the end you're really friends for each of them, and then you go to middle school, again a class that goes together in parallel. Here, every year they mix up the classes because they don't want to you know, they think it's more healthy for people not to develop special friendship and then prevent them to interface more generally with the rest of the children. And, but also, in general, there is a very great emphasis in the educational system where everybody takes his own responsibility to work on his own, to collaborate and maybe to do things together for a limited amount of time, but basically you're you and your life. In Italy, we're always in a big group. And I don't know, I feel like in general, Europeans that come here have a more of a tendency to develop this team spirit in the lab. I can see a difference. And you know, there are two different ways to experience the professional life. And again, synergy and cross-fertilization is the way to go. We have the opportunity to take the best out of both worlds. One other thing I want to mention that as I traveled around the United States, I saw the tremendous difference between different academic institutions. You come to Yale, you have a lot of quality, you go to Harvard, to ISSNAF, etc. Then you go from some university more in the province, and the quality of the student is not as good, the quality of the postdoc is not as good, of the teachers. So basically what happened in the society, which is so mobile, everybody clustered in the best places. In Italy, you live where you have grown up. You live close to your mom, to your father. I think there is more mobility now than there used to be, but the situation is still that people tend to stick to the place where they grew up. The result of this, that there are brilliant people a little bit everywhere. And so, for example, when people apply to my lab, they come not necessarily from the best institution. I just don't limit myself just to examine the CV and the publication, etc., because you can really find jewel any place, more so in Italy than in this country, where somebody is good, you would have gone to a top institution to study. Anyway, this was just some of the difference that struck me over the years, and my point is that there is not one thing is better than the other. The idea is to, as I say, to use this difference as a tool for synergy and cross-fertilization. But I think it's important that you bring your own value that come with your ethnicity, with your upbringing, etc., wherever you go. In many ways, we have different set of values, but what we are expected to do is to bring our set of values. We are valued because we bring something special and different. I remember the first time I went to, I joined a member of the MD PhD admission committee, and we were selecting the MD PhD students, sometimes my view is very different from the view of the other member of the panel, and I was a little bit hesitant to express my different view. And then I gained confidence, and I started actually to be very determined in expressing my view, because that's what we have to do, and that's what makes a place like this great, that everybody bring a different way to evaluate things and people and situation and science. Anyway, what I want to do now is, since this is called the mentorship lecture, to list some of the advices that I would give to a young scientist, and for whatever they're worth. The first thing is choose carefully your mentors. I would say that this is the best possible advice I can give. The mentor is more important than what the field of science. The mentor is the person that inspires you, that provides a vision, that tells you how to work. You know, you can always move to a different field later on, but the imprinting that you get to your mentor is really something that stays with you for your whole life. You need somebody that inspires you, and somebody that maybe 20, 30 years from life, when you have to confront a different situation, you will be able to think about this person and say, how would he have done it? How would he have dealt with this interpersonal relationship? How would he have dealt with this difficult situation at work? How could he have developed a project, an idea, etc.? So really the mentor is the most important. Choosing the mentor, choosing the lab when you are young is really the most important thing that you can do. Even in the best labs, you may find things that you don't like. You may not like something of your mentor, but you should really look for a place that will be where the mentor will be a role model. Within the boundary of what I just told you, choose a good mentor, the next thing I would say, choose a good problem. So this is a very intense work. We work very hard. We have to sacrifice many other things in life to be successful scientists. We might as well do something important. And so I think you should put a lot of thought in what you want to do, the field you want to pursue. Have a vision. Decide what you want to be 10 years from now. Just not to think only about what's going on now, but really project yourself for the future. Diversify your training. So all of you have at least two possibilities, at least in the sciences, and then the humanities is different, but you do a graduate study, you do a PhD, and then you do a postdoc. And I think it's very important to carefully choose two areas, so more diversified, different from each other, because this not only broaden your horizon, but give you the opportunity, after you finish, to start your lab doing something really unique. Because if you put together two different experiences, graduate student in one area, postdoc in another area, then you will have two sets of expertise, two sets of knowledge that are really unique. They are unique to you. And so this is really something that allows you to do, to create connection, link, establish bridges between things that nobody else attempted. And so this allows you then to come up with a research program which is really very special. And obviously, I think the best to start a career, to start by doing something very special and unique, not just to continue along the line where you were launched when you were a postdoc. I think it's important to start something new and original. Also diversify your methodological training, because one of the advantages of this is that to feel comfortable with methodology. I think all of us experience or have experienced some hesitancy to develop, to use new instrumentation, to develop project in direction where we are not comfortable with method. They bring us really to do things that we're not comfortable with. But the more we have experienced different methodology, the more we feel comfortable with technique, etc. So the more we are empowered and we are allowed to be courageous in selecting our research direction. Also, we make the most creative finding in areas in which we really understand the methodology. In order to see beyond our postdoc, SPI, if you want to help the postdoc or a student to see beyond the obvious between the expected, you really need to understand the method, because you can see, the deviation of the average of the mean. You see the unexpected, the blip on the screen, which is a seed for a new important discovery. And unfortunately, this can be done, it's easier when you're young, when you're really close to the lab. And unfortunately, I'm not that close to the lab anymore. But I know that my best contribution even now is when I can understand what's going on. So stay as close to the data as much as you can. Do not let the fashion drive you. It's sometimes, we feel like there are hot areas, and we feel like it'd be nice to be in that areas because it's glamorous and the cover of the good journal, etc. But in the long run, it's much better to take something which is in the backwater and to bring it to the front, to make something fashionable rather than to follow the fashion. Take a little bit of courage, but in the long run, is really much more rewarding. One important thing is the finishing power. What do I mean by finishing power? It's not enough to be smart. It's not enough to do interesting things, to do interesting experiments. One has to bring them to closure. One should not open up like a fractal and go in a different direction. At some point, after having explored different areas, it's important to set some goal, to focus, and to bring things to closure one thing at a time. Because eventually, is the thing that you close one thing at a time that represent the collection of things that represent your curriculum vitae, represent your contribution to science and essentially your credentials. Get to know people. Get to know people and let yourself be known. Obviously, one should limit the amount of travel because one has to be in the lab, you cannot be continuously on the road. But an appropriate degree of traveling to go to meetings, to go to encounter people, to go to give a few seminars is very critical, because our ability to judge science is heavily influenced by what we think of people because of personal knowledge. And likewise, when people read our paper, when people read our grant, if they know us, they have a different perception. They can put things in the proper perspective. And I think this is very important. Always look for an environment where you find people better than you. There are two ways to organize life. You can be the better person when surrounded by mediocrity, or you can be a person that is not at the top because people around you are so much better. And that is one of the advantages of being here, because there are so many great people. And we can only be as good as our colleague. Our colleague continually inspire you. And I have to say, when I look around in my department, for example, I can look up to all my colleagues, and this is an incredible privilege. They help me to be better. And for example, one of the luck I had over the last 20 years has been to be a member of our Hughes Medical Institute, which is a great institution that supports great science. And again, one of the greatest things has not been so much the funding, also that, but is to go to this meeting where everybody is better than me. And this is really something incredibly, is an incredible privilege. Well, I guess a couple more things I want to say. One is, especially for the young scientists, the younger scientists here, do not rush to fill slots in your lab. Starting slowly, starting progressively, build the foundation and develop things in a systematic way. And finally, let people time to think. Let them take time for take the time off. Let them really find the proper balance between their life, their personal life, and their life in the lab. If you want to have a good scientist, a productive scientist, and an happy scientist, you really have to let people to develop in a global way their personality. Okay, this is the end of my list of advice. Just before ending, a few things about going back to Italy. This I would like to be more a discussion than, I don't have anything particular to tell you, teach you. As I said, I went back to Italy, and then for a variety of reasons I came back here, so I have experienced this difficulty at some point in making a decision. There is no question that staying here is better for science. It comes at a rather big personal cost because, especially for us that come, I don't know if there are here people from the nationality, but we that come from Italy, we have a very strong connection to our country. And as I said before, we have a rather stable society, a society that is not used to move around. The cost is very high. And so one has to balance what's better for us. But one thing I would like to leave you with is the following. There are places in Italy where science can be done. There are some really good places. There are some really good people. And there are also bad places. If you go there, and if you really, for science for you is a priority, the critical thing is to look for a place where you will build a position to do some good science, irrespectively of the stability of the job. So you are, when somebody finishes a postdoc, this is the best time of life, of professional life, the time when it has the greatest potential to make great contribution. And the greatest thing that one can do back in Italy is to take your potential and compress it, because they put it in a place where you have a salary, a stability guaranteed from now to when you retire. But it's a place where you cannot express this potential. And so your currency is really the science you do. And it's much more important to take care of this currency now when you have the potential to continuously increase the value of your currency, even if you don't have guarantee of position, if you don't have guarantee of stability. And so maybe in order to go back, you have to go in places where we have temporary position, but the environment is so much better than a stable position. Also because, after all, in spite of the fact that a lot of positions in Italy are distributed according to nepotism, etc., ultimately the quality of the science counts. And for example, once in a while there are really good positions, there are openings for professors, etc. And eventually somebody does very good science can have a good offer. So for example, I had several times offered to go back to Italy, and really what counts at the level is what you've done, what you have achieved. So my advice to you is, no matter what this implies, always give the highest priority to places that allow you to do the best science. And I guess that's all what I have to say. So, can I have a discussion? Yeah.
I have a question. Like, you suggest us, like, it's very important to find the right mentor. How do you recognize it?
Well, on this one, I don't have an advice. It's really a question of your personal taste. So you want what you want from a mentor is somebody that really is genuinely interested in science, in scientifically rigorous, and interested in mentorship. You know where you see it. Yeah.
So I'm not Italian, but I'm married to an Italian, so I think it counts, right? The thing is, you talked about Italian.
Where are you from?
Brazil. Yeah, it's a weird marriage, right? Anyway, the point is, you talked about Italians being more able to work in groups. And when you came here, you faced this very individual, they reward the individual achievements.
There are exceptions, but on average, so yeah.
Yeah, that's something that I felt when I first came here too. So, and I think it is also reflected on the way that science here is funded. So it's basically an individual.
Yeah,
so, but the way I see it, maybe I'm wrong, moving forward, I think more and more collaboration is required to get good science done. Do you see, I certainly expect, but do you see the funding of research rewarding more collaborative work than individual work going forward? Or
I agree 100% with what you say. I was very frustrated. I always thought that the idea of the NIH to be so obsessive about who is leading the project is kill collaboration. So if I want to collaborate with one of you, and at some point we have to apply for a grant, the person, the one of us that will get the grant is the person that is recognized as the leader. In spite of whatever is written, people tell, no, that's not the case, etc., but there is this tendency here. And so what I'm telling you is bring your diversity and try to change the system, and that's actually what I'm trying to do myself, okay? We need to change this culture. We need to create a culture where the collaboration is a plus and is not something which is punishing. The NIH has come a little bit this way because now you can do grant with two real investigators. Before it was investigator and a co-investigator, and now you can do two really equal investigators. I think this is the direction to go, especially with the shortage of funding right now. I couldn't agree more with you, and I think there's something that needs to be changed. So I did too much talking.
So what about very difficult projects? So somebody tends to stick to very difficult projects, and then the finishing power is beyond the thermodynamic effect.
Yeah, that's actually what makes a good scientist, to know what time to pursue things and to continue, to know when it's time to stop. And I think finding the right balance is what makes somebody a good scientist. I don't have a recipe, but stubbornly sticking to something when it's becoming clear that it's not going to work is not a good idea. That's basically my view. There should be the feeling that beyond difficulty there is feasibility. And at some point when you see that this is not the case, one has to admit the reality, maybe to go back a few years later when the methodology is changed and there are more, that you can tackle the problem in a different way. And that's true also. I see that with postdoc students in my lab all the time. You assign them a project, and then the project doesn't really work very well. And the question is when you stop and when you continue. And it's a sort of balance. But the bottom line is that you have eventually, at the end of the day, you have something to show. And on your CV, you need to have a tangible thing to show. Today is a publication, tomorrow maybe, I don't know, saying the poisoning database is being continuously evolved. But you need to have something to show. And so you cannot only show promise, you have to show facts. Yeah.
So you suggested us to go for the best place despite the uncertainty. But So I guess my question is how you suggest to deal with the anxiety that the uncertainty put on us. I mean,
I'll deal with the
anxiety that not really sure what's gonna be about myself in 3 or 4 years. How I can deal with it because I'm certainly anxious about it. So I know that the best science is the best choice, but sometimes, you know, you have to know how to say it.
I know, but I don't deny that there is a real problem there. But my question, what I want to say is that if you work with great passion in science, eventually you make it. And you know, I think that if you have something to offer, even in the most difficult circumstances, eventually something material. So basically my point is to be courageous, okay? If you look for safety, that's it.
Do you have any suggestions for someone who actually wants to go back to Italy, or I'm not from Italy, but to go to do science and medicine in Europe? Do you have any suggestions for how you make connections or how you do that?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm glad you mentioned Europe. Right now, Europe can be very attractive because the big difference that there is in Europe is that when you go to an institution, particularly, let's talk to the non-Italian institution for now, then we talk about Italy. You know, like Germany, England, etc. They give you money, they give you hard money, okay, compared to here. Okay, here you get a job and you're the startup and that's it basically, and then you are on your own. Depending on the university, and more or less salary, but basically you're continuously on soft money. And in Europe, you get a grant. If you go to Germany, you get your salary, the position for your technician, the position for a postdoc. It can be very attractive right now. I see a big trend for people to go back to Europe. In Italy, unfortunately, the situation is different. But so my point is that try to keep as many contacts as possible with the place you come from. You know, if you come from Italy, try to keep this contact as much as possible. And then exploit many European countries, and Italy included, have this program for people to go back. For Italy, Italy has two. It has a Teleton and the Armenese. And so these are grants that are given to people that go back to Italy after a period abroad. They are given on a competitive basis, and they give you salary for generous salaries for. Teleton is 5 years, I don't remember Armenese. And grant for you know, money for a postdoc, a technician. I mean, it's really quite competitive. I mean, similar to what you could have here for an assistant professor position. And this is a fantastic way to go back. Obviously, you need to have very competitive. But keeping in touch is good. And unfortunately, it's late to say for somebody who's already here, but my suggestion is always, before going abroad, develop some contact in your country so that you can keep connection even when you are away. Yeah.
Dr. De Camilli, can you comment on your thoughts on bringing in funding from private sectors into science without corrupting the essence of science? Because clearly there are many more good scientific questions to be worked on than what the government can afford to fund.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. You mean money from foundation or for companies?
Both.
Well, this is a very debated issue, but things are actually moving. And just to give you an example, we concluded. My lab concluded an agreement with a company over the last year for an equivalent of a R1, and it was the first time the Our Use Medical Institute agreed to this deal. So it's a confederation, is a consortium of labs, not only my lab. There is a consortium of labs that has an agreement with the company to study a disease, And the first time that the Our Use Medical Institute allowed that has been extensively investigated by the lawyer, and the Our Use Medical Institute, in fact, exactly did what you say. See, it's time to stop this distinction between sponsored research and non-sponsored research. We want to promote interaction between fundamental research and the applied sector, and so they scrutinized very extensively this possibility, and so now we have this grant. But it goes exactly in the direction you say. So even the Our Use Medical Institute, that has been incredibly restrictive in this area, not to allow sponsored research, is bending a little bit the rule because I think that it can be very useful. Obviously, everything has to be it's important that scientific integrity is not compromised. Absolutely.
And maybe last question. So you mentioned like there are several good institutions in Italy. Actually, they work very well. They're very competitive. And you have some contact with them. Like, do you?
And also the university. There are some really wonderful places.
Yeah. So like my question is like from your point of view, like from the outside point of view, do you see that like they're becoming international? Are they trying to hunt for like good researchers that are not Italian? So like trying to bring in.
Absolutely, absolutely. So these places they actually hire. You go to the IPO in Milano, they have a lot of principal investigators foreigners. Yeah.
So Italy is becoming a bit more international.
The only thing I want to make a comment on this institution, and I'm sure they hope and things will change, and I'm sure it will change, is that these institutions tend to be highly connected to some charismatic personality that created them. We don't have yet the continuity of the structure beyond the continuity of the person. Here at Yale, if any professor died, the president resigned, the pope, or the institution has its own stability. It exists on its own. There is something that sticks to it. And I have the feeling, not the feeling, the reality that if you take all these institutions in Italy, which I will not rename, but we can, each of them has few, maybe 1, 2, 3 charismatic personalities at the top, and people say what happened when they are gone. And this is really, we need to find a way to create entities, institutions that have their own life, independently of who is at the helm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What do you think about the possibility of collaboration between American and European? Because from my experience, which is limited, I know that Europeans tend not to work or willing to work easily with Americans, maybe because of the difference, cultural difference and individuality. But do you think that, say, somebody go back to Europe and create a small group, would it help to be in collaboration with previous place in America, like in USA, or like would it enhance the?
Yeah. No, what you say, I actually cannot say that there is a tendency not to collaborate with the American. I've not experienced, but what you say bring to mind another point that is interesting to touch, which is the fact that here in America, as you were saying before, collaboration sometimes is seen negatively. In principle, it's not, but I've seen that happen. Okay, so you collaborate with the person. So are you the leader or you're? In Italy, there is so little trust of us Italians that sometimes your research is good only if you collaborate with an American. Okay, that's the reality. Okay, then if I put the name, if you are a postdoc and become independent here, and you put the name of your former mentor, that's the key for that. For your career, you have to show that you can go on your own. In Italy, if you you go back to Italy and you put the name of your American mentor, that must be good because it's still in collaboration with an American. So, and that's unfortunate. Is a very provincial way to think about it.
Maybe one more question.
Okay.
So I think like